July 1943. The Allied invasion of Sicily has been underway for exactly 3 weeks. In a command bunker outside Messina, Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, the most respected field commander in the German army, sits down to write an urgent dispatch to Berlin. His message is direct, clear, and terrifying. The American commander in the western sector displays tactical sophistication we did not anticipate. His movements suggest intimate knowledge of our doctrine. He exploits weaknesses before we recognize them ourselves. This is not the enemy we studied. Recommend immediate tactical review of all Sicilian defensive positions. Rommel does not use the word genius. German officers do not use that word lightly. But his fellow generals in Berlin read between the lines, and they dismiss him. The Americans, the same Americans who stumbled at Kasserine Pass just 5 months earlier, the same force that Rommel himself had pushed back in Tunisia, they were wrong to dismiss him. And the story of exactly how Rommel identified George S. Patton's brilliance before the rest of the German High Command is a masterclass in recognizing when your enemy has evolved beyond your expectations. Let me show you what Rommel saw, that his colleagues refused to believe. The German High Command had spent years studying American military doctrine. They read the manuals published by the U.S. Army War College. They interviewed prisoners of war. They analyzed battle reports from North Africa, and they came to a comfortable conclusion. American generals were methodical, predictable, and overly cautious. They relied on firepower to compensate for tactical creativity. They telegraphed their intentions days in advance through massive logistical buildups. This assessment was not arrogance. It was based on data. At Kasserine Pass in February 1943, German forces under Rommel's command tore through American lines, inflicting 6,000 casualties and capturing 4,000 prisoners in less than a week. American units panicked. Officers abandoned their posts. Entire battalions retreated in disorder. Berlin studied those reports and concluded the Americans would need years to develop competent field leadership. Years they would not have. But Rommel saw something in those same reports that troubled him. Yes, the Americans had broken, but they had learned. After-action reports showed American officers conducting immediate tactical reviews, adapting their defensive positions, and changing their communication protocols. The speed of that institutional learning was unusual and troubling. Then came Sicily. July 10, 1943. Operation Husky. The largest amphibious invasion in history up to that point. 160,000 Allied troops landed on the southern coast of Sicily. The British 8th Army under Montgomery on the east. The American 7th Army under George S. Patton on the west. German intelligence expected the Americans to move slowly, consolidate the beachhead, build up supplies, then advance methodically toward Palermo and Messina. That is what the doctrine suggested. That's what every Allied operation in North Africa had done. Patton did the opposite, July 11th, 1 day after landing. Before his supply lines are even fully established, Patton sends the 2nd Armored Division north in a lightning thrust toward the interior. Not the expected cautious advance, a blitzkrieg, the German word for lightning war, now being used against them by an American commander. Rommel is observing from the mainland. He is not directly commanding in Sicily, but he is reviewing intelligence reports daily. And on July 12th, he sees something that makes him reach for his secure telephone. The American 2nd Armored Division has covered 54 miles in 36 hours. Through mountainous terrain, on roads the Germans assumed were too poor for armored operation. Patton's tanks are bypassing German strongpoints, leaving them isolated, cutting off their supplies, forcing them to retreat or surrender without firing a shot. This is not American doctrine. This is German doctrine. Bewegungskrieg, maneuver warfare, the core principle of blitzkrieg. Bypass strong points, disrupt command and control. Force the enemy to react to you, never the other way around. Rommel sends his first warning to Berlin on July 13th. The response he receives is polite but dismissive. The Desert Fox is being overly cautious. The Americans are simply following our own tactics. They will overextend and we will cut them off as we did at Kasserine. But Patton does not overextend. That's what Rommel sees that Berlin refuses to acknowledge. Yes, Patton is moving fast, but his supply lines are intact. His flanks are secured by infantry divisions moving in coordinated parallel advances. His reconnaissance units are probing constantly, identifying German positions before committing armor. This is not reckless aggression. This is calculated risk backed by professional execution. July 15. Patton's forces take the town of Agrigento on the southern coast, then immediately pivot west toward Palermo. Again, this is the opposite of what German planners expected. Conventional wisdom said the Americans would drive north toward Messina to link up with Montgomery's British forces. That is the strategic objective. That is what matters. But Patton ignores Messina. He drives 100 miles west to Palermo, the largest city in western Sicily, a major port, a symbolic prize. And he takes it in 7 days. July 22nd, American tanks roll into Palermo. The Italian garrison surrenders without significant resistance. Patton has just conquered half of Sicily in less than 2 weeks. Rommel sends his second warning to Berlin. This one is more explicit. The American commander demonstrates understanding of operational tempo that exceeds British capability. His decision to take Palermo before Messina shows strategic independence. This officer is thinking beyond the immediate tactical situation. Recommend we reassess American command quality. The response from Berlin is less polite this time. Rommel is told, in carefully diplomatic language, that he is overreacting. That Patton's drive to Palermo was a publicity stunt, not a serious military operation. That the real battle will be the drive to Messina, and there the Americans will stall as they always do when facing prepared German defensive positions. Rommel does not argue. He simply watches, and what he sees over the next 3 weeks confirms his worst fears. Patton pivots his entire army from Palermo and drives east toward Messina. But he does not do it the way the Germans expect. He does not drive straight up the northern coastal road into prepared German positions. Instead, he launches a series of amphibious end runs, small-scale beach landings behind German lines, cutting off their retreat routes, forcing them to abandon prepared positions and fall back. The first landing happens on August 8th near Sant'Agata. American infantry land behind German lines, take the coastal road, cut off the retreat of an entire regiment. The Germans are forced to abandon their positions and withdraw east. Before they can establish a new defensive line, Patton launches another amphibious landing further east, then another. 4 amphibious operations in 9 days, each one small. Each one perfectly coordinated with the main advance. Each one forcing the Germans to give up ground without the Americans having to fight for it. This is not something you do without intimate understanding of combined arms operations. Coordinating naval transport, amphibious landings, artillery support, and ground advances requires precision timing and professional staff work. The Americans at Kasserine Pass 5 months ago could not do this. The Americans in Sicily are doing it routinely. Rommel sends his third warning on August 12th. This one is blunt. Patton is operating inside our decision cycle. He is forcing us to react to him faster than our command structure allows. This is the core principle of maneuver warfare. The fact that an American commander understands this represents a fundamental shift in capability. We must adapt, or we will continue to lose ground. Berlin's response is silence. Not because they do not believe him, but because by August 12th, it is obvious to everyone that Rommel was right. August 17, 1943, American forces enter Messina. They beat Montgomery's British 8th Army by several hours, which Patton considers a personal victory. The entire Sicily campaign has taken 38 days. German forces have been pushed off the island. Italy is now wide open to invasion. But here's what matters for our story. After Sicily, German intelligence files on George S. Patton grow from a few pages to several volumes. Every operation he commands is studied in detail. His tactics are analyzed. His patterns are documented. German commanders are briefed specifically on Patton sectors, and warned that standard defensive doctrine may not work. The officer who dismissed Rommel's warnings most loudly in July 1943 was General Hans Hube, commander of the 14th Panzer Corps in Sicily. After the campaign, Hube submitted his own report to Berlin. In it, he wrote, "Rommel's assessment of the American commander was correct. I was wrong to dismiss it. Patton does not fight like an American. He fights like the best of our own panzer commanders. This represents a serious problem for future operations." But by then, the damage was done. The dismissal of Rommel's early warnings meant that German forces in Sicily fought with outdated assumptions about American capability. They expected slow, methodical advances. They got lightning strikes. They expected telegraphed intentions. They got deception and surprise. They expected to have time to react. They were constantly behind Patton's decision cycle. Let me show you the specific tactical innovations that Rommel identified in those first 3 weeks. First, the use of terrain. German doctrine assumed Americans would stick to roads and avoid difficult terrain because of their reliance on heavy vehicles and supply columns. Patton's forces routinely moved through mountains, using mule trains and infantry to secure high ground before bringing in armor and artillery. This forced German defenders to cover more approaches than they had troops to defend. Second, the tempo of operations. German forces were trained to expect a rhythm to American attacks. Morning artillery preparation, midday infantry advance, afternoon consolidation, evening resupply. This predictability allowed German commanders to anticipate when they were safe to move reserves or conduct counterattacks. Patton threw out the rhythm. His forces attacked at night. They attacked during supposed resupply periods. They attacked with minimal artillery preparation, relying on speed and surprise instead of firepower. German defenders never knew when the next blow would come, which meant they had to remain in constant defensive posture, which exhausted them. Third, decentralized command. German intelligence expected American operations to be tightly controlled from higher headquarters, with unit commanders waiting for orders before acting. This was the pattern they had seen in North Africa. Patton did the opposite. He gave his division and regimental commanders clear objectives and let them determine how to achieve them. When a German position was encountered, American units did not stop and wait for orders. They probed for weaknesses, called in support, and attacked immediately. This created a tempo of operations that German forces, despite their own decentralized doctrine, struggled to match. Rommel saw all of this in the first 3 weeks. He saw it because he understood maneuver warfare at an instinctive level. He recognized in Patton a mirror image of his own approach to combat. Aggressive, fast, willing to take risks, but not reckless. Always maintaining the ability to respond to unexpected developments. The other German generals did not see it, because they were still thinking about Americans, as they had been at Kasserine Pass. They were fighting the last war, not the current one. Here is what makes this story significant beyond just two commanders respecting each other across battle lines. Rommel's warnings in July 1943 represent a critical moment in German strategic thinking. For the first time, a senior German commander was explicitly telling Berlin that American military capability had evolved beyond their estimates, that the comfortable assumptions about American inexperience and lack of tactical sophistication were no longer valid. If Berlin had listened, if they had taken Rommel's warnings seriously and adjusted their defensive planning accordingly, the campaigns in Italy and later in France might have unfolded differently, not necessarily with different outcomes, but with different tactical approaches that might have been more effective against commanders like Patton. But they did not listen, and the pattern repeated. When Patton took command of the Third Army in France in 1944, German forces were again surprised by his speed, his aggression, his willingness to take risks that paid off. The warnings were already in the intelligence files, but institutional resistance to changing comfortable assumptions meant those warnings were ignored. There is a broader lesson here about military organizations and how they assess enemy capability. The German military in World War II had a well-deserved reputation for tactical excellence and adaptive thinking. But even excellent organizations can fall into the trap of confirmation bias, seeing what they expect to see rather than what the evidence shows. Rommel saw past that bias because his own experience in North Africa had taught him that enemies evolve. The British forces he faced in 1942 were dramatically better than the British forces he faced in 1941. He expected the same from the American. His colleagues in Berlin, who had not faced the Americans directly, relied on outdated intelligence and comfortable assumptions. The irony is that Patton himself studied Rommel extensively. He read everything available about Rommel's campaigns in North Africa. He analyzed Rommel's tactics. When Patton designed his approach to the Sicily campaign, he was explicitly thinking about how to fight a Rommel-style defense. Use speed to get inside the decision cycle. Use maneuver to avoid strength. Use surprise to create opportunities. So when Rommel recognized Patton's approach in those first 3 weeks, he was seeing his own influence reflected back at him. And unlike his colleagues in Berlin, he understood immediately that an enemy who learns from you is far more dangerous than an enemy who does not. After the war, when historians examined German intelligence files, they found extensive documentation of Patton's operations, files that grew thicker with each campaign, reports that showed increasing respect and caution when facing Patton's forces. And buried in those files, Rommel's original warnings from July 1943, marked with annotations from other officers. Overstated, premature assessment, recommend continued observation before revising doctrine. Those annotations represent one of the great missed opportunities of German defensive planning. If those warnings had been heeded, if German forces in Italy and France had prepared specifically for Patton-style operations from the beginning, the tactical situation might have been different. But here is the thing about institutional inertia. It is easier to dismiss a warning than to restructure your entire operational planning around it. It is easier to assume your initial assessment was correct than to admit you underestimated the enemy. It is easier to wait for overwhelming evidence than to act on early indicators. The German High Command waited for overwhelming evidence. By the time they got it, Patton was already in Messina, then Italy, then France, then Germany itself. Rommel never commanded against Patton directly after Sicily. He was sent to France to prepare coastal defenses against the expected invasion. He was severely wounded in an air attack in July 1944 and forced to commit suicide in October 1944 after being implicated in the plot to kill Hitler. He never saw Patton's greatest campaigns: the breakout from Normandy, the race across France, the relief of Bastogne. But in those 3 weeks in July 1943, Rommel saw enough. He saw an American commander who thought like the best German commanders, who understood tempo and maneuver and calculated risk, who had studied the German way of war and adapted it to American strengths, massive logistics and firepower combined with German-style aggression, and he tried to warn his colleagues. They did not listen. That failure to listen, that institutional resistance to revising comfortable assumptions, cost German forces dearly in every subsequent campaign where they faced Patton's Third Army. The lesson is not just about Rommel and Patton. It is about what happens when organizations ignore their own experts because the warning does not fit their expectations. It is about the cost of confirmation bias in high-stakes situations. It is about the difference between looking at evidence and actually seeing what it is telling you. So, here is my question for you. Knowing that Rommel correctly identified Patton's capability in 3 weeks, while his colleagues took months to reach the same conclusion, what does that tell you about the importance of field experience versus staff analysis in military intelligence? Should Berlin have given more weight to Rommel's assessment because he had actually fought the Americans, or were they right to demand more evidence before changing their doctrine? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If this story changed how you think about military leadership and institutional decision-making, hit that like button and subscribe for more history that shows you the moments when ignoring expert warnings changed the course of campaigns. Thanks for watching.